A warm welcome to everyone that's joining this webinar on difficult conversations and gender in the workplace. I'm Lisa Sweeney, I'm the CEO of Business in Heels. So a warm welcome to everyone that's joining us. Please take a minute to say hello in the chat and tell us where you're coming from. And thank you so much for joining Gender in the Workplace, Difficult Conversations for Men. And let's get started. So welcome everybody that's joining us. I'm Lisa Sweeney, CEO of Business in Heels, the team that are proudly working to accelerate gender equity with the Gender Equity Awards Recalibrate. Let's begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we join today's meeting, from wherever you are across this vast and diverse country. And today I'm meeting with you from the Wathaurong land. In the spirit of reconciliation, Business in Heels acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to the elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that inclusion is not a new concept for our First Nations. They've been demonstrating this for tens of thousands of years and caring for the country, each other, and putting a real value on the environment. Welcome to today's discussion on gender in the workplace. I just wanted to mention to you all that Equal Pay Day was on August 25th. Now, many of you don't know this, but in 1969, Australian women earned the right to equal pay for equal work, but something still seems to be missing. And on average, women in Australia earn less than men. This is called the gender pay gap. So Equal Pay Day marks the 56 extra additional days that from the end of the financial year, the women must work to earn the same average pay. So gender equity and inclusion creates strong and productive teams and delivers great results. It's proven time and time again. However, in many places, we know that many of you want to do more. On behalf of your wives, mothers and daughters, you don't want to wait for another generation before things improve. So today, with the emphasis on political correctness, gender fluidity and increased litigation, many of you are unsure how to take action. Explaining your lack of know-how is often misconstrued as a lack of support, and so much of this remains undiscussed. So today's discussion will go some way to giving you a roadmap, but you can take action to become better informed and to become a male ally to those in Business in Heels. And every membership, which costs $99, also includes one for a woman. So you can start your advocacy and allyship there. Or you can nominate individuals for the Gender Equity Award. Well, actually they've closed, so we're excited the awards are not too far away. Now, today we've got joined by our guest, Robert Kelly, who has kindly flown into the country this morning and rushed all the way through to this webinar, and Matthew Monahan. They're going to share with us their experiences and approaches to give you that roadmap that you can choose to adopt. So let me introduce Robert properly. Our first panelist is Robert Kelly. He co-founded Steadfast, one of the biggest insurance companies in Australia, in 1996 to provide insurance-related quality advice and service, leading the company to become the largest general insurance broker network and underwriting agency in Australia and New Zealand, and an ASX-listed 100 company. The Steadfast Group is the largest general insurance broker network and the largest group of insurance underwriting agencies in Australasia, with growing operations in Asia and Europe. He recently received the prestigious award of the Member of the Order of Australia, an AM, on the Queen's birthday in 2022 honours list. So welcome, Robert. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. A pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. And yes, it was a bit of a rush, but we're here.
No, these are the things we do. Now, Robert, in your experience, sometimes it's the environment that creates difficult situations. And Steadfast is famous for its conferences. So share with us your story of what happened at one of the conferences and your challenge in handling it in relation to gender equity.
Look, it's really difficult, I think, when you run a big conference, and we have between 2,000 and 2,700 people go to our conferences, that people get into a situation of having fun during the day, and then at night there's always functions and there's drinking at the functions. And I mean, we got to a situation where we never wanted to be I guess policing everybody and watching what they were doing, and so we had functions that were well supervised and that finished about 11 o'clock at night, and everybody was in, I guess, what will we do next for a few hours? Okay, and then you get to a situation where there's a range of people, younger people, you know, basically from early 20s to sort of early 40s, and they go out and they continue to drink, and then you know you have a mixture of males and females, and then the line of delineation between what's appropriate behaviour and what is not appropriate gets blurred a little bit because of the alcohol. There's no supervision at that particular time, but the genesis of where it gets to emanated out of the our conference, and where we had people together. So you then get us to a situation where one person interprets another person's point of view, and there's a difference in perception about what one person wanted and what another didn't, and then it leads on to a younger person feeling intimidated, an older person feeling empowered, and it degrades itself into something which is not acceptable from one point of view and not understood by another point of view. And I think we all want to make sure that people who work in our businesses work with safety and immunity from ever feeling oppressed or harassed. And so this situation, I guess, morphed into a position of harassment. We had an external investigation done, and there was no, actually, interestingly, there was no difference between both parties that were involved in this, what they said. They both said this is what occurred, except that one person thought it was perfectly okay and acceptable, and the other person thought it was intimidation and not acceptable. And so you have to consider the circumstances and say, if somebody ever feels that it's not acceptable to be treated that way, then there's something wrong in how things are conducted. And so in this particular case, one person was completely intimidated. The other person admitted that there was alcohol involved, and it cost one person their job. Okay, because we had to support the fundamental belief that in the workplace you must feel that you are never intimidated, or that you are never in a position of having to do something that you may not want to do. So subjectivity, on one hand, one person thought it was good. On the other hand, one person was intimidated, and that's a thing that we had to act very quickly on, because we have a position as a corporate entity. Well, I guess no, I'll rephrase that. As human beings, that not one person should be put in a position of fear by another person, and then. As I say, one person lost their job over an issue which I guess maybe 30 years ago would have been, oh, it'll be okay, right? And I guess it wasn't okay 30 years ago. And I guess a lot of people, and I'm talking women, put up with a series of circumstances that was not acceptable to them, but they were not going perhaps to mention it for fear they may lose their job or the ability to go forward. And so I think as I guess as a continent of people, we've matured into understanding that there are two sides to every story, and if somebody takes it the wrong way, it's your responsibility for making them feel that way. So, as I say, it cost one person their job, and I guess it laid down a fundamental situation with us that we have to be more careful when we are bringing people together, and about what respect should be paid between them. So it was a good lesson for us, and a bad lesson for one of the two people, because they lost their job. And indeed, on reflection, the young girl that was intimidated, I don't think she felt happy that the person had lost their job, but there was no way out. You either accept what was going on and shut up, or you go, it's not acceptable, and raise it, and everybody has to bear the responsibility of that. Us as the employer, her as the person that was intimidated, and the person who made the fundamental mistake of doing the wrong thing. So it's all I'm saying is that it's better to be aware in advance rather than be left with the problems, and to foresee something like that as something that needs checking. And I mean, next year when we run our conference, we'll have some very, not strict rules, I wouldn't say that, but we'll have some very strict directives to all of our staff about how we expect them to behave. And also, it's not widely known, but it's quite known what went on, that this organisation doesn't accept intimidation of anybody.
Well, and that sets some amazing standards, Robert, and clearly you've got the processes and everything in play. But I can tell you, when I started work, we did a lot of travelling and a lot of, socialising, and none of those guidelines were there. As you say, 30 years ago, it was a whole different ball game. So I think we've all got to accept that life has matured. So let me introduce our next panellist. Our next panellist is Matthew Monahan. He's the CEO of the Franchise Council of Australia. Despite having taken on the role in May 2023, Matthew's already driving change. Among the key initiatives he's already introduced for Australia are 174 billion franchise sector, an intense national response across the Franchise Council of Australia's members as part of the current federal government review of the franchising code. And I know he's been travelling on the road extensively over the last couple of weeks. Matthew brings an impressive reputation for driving transformation in a collaborative way, especially within the member organisations, to his new role at the FCA. He has more than 20 years of experience working in sector leadership roles across private, not-for-profit and public sector organisations across multiple sectors, including sustainability, medical services, animal welfare and childcare. And Matthew's also a fellow of both Governance Institute of Australia of Management and holds an MBA, and has recently completed some executive studies with the Sayed Business Guide. Gosh, I don't know when you have time for all this, Matthew, on business disruption and digital transformation. He is very committed to driving development of organisational capacity and capability through the effective governance, leadership and sustainable business practices. So welcome, Matthew. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
So we're talking a little bit about difficult conversations. So Matthew, have you witnessed bullying or bad behaviour, and what approach did you choose to take?
I definitely have, and I feel, I guess, coming into varying different organisations, I feel working within a membership organisations, I've had the opportunity to connect with members and seen a lot of different workplaces, and myself directly where I've observed bullying within the workplace. I think the first kind of area for identification and to really focus on is the education piece, and really making sure that in creating a safe, inclusive environment, it's really important to make sure that people are open to having conversations. And I feel holding webinars like this, Lisa, are a great opportunity to really highlight the importance of setting a culture from top down, but also making sure that there is that awareness and sense of accountability through that process. I've been in situations where, you know, from a cultural perspective, historically there had been an acceptance of certain behaviours, and part of my role in coming into that organisation was looking at what is our strategy and what is our process. I think process and policy is so important to not just set but really operationalise and carry that through, and that's something that I'm really passionate about.
So in a situation, if and this is a question to both of you, if you actually witness something and you're on the spot, do you feel you should address it on the spot in front of everybody, or should you go and talk to the person separately, privately? What's your opinion, Robert?
I personally think that to address it at the time in front of everybody is very confrontational for people around it. And my view on that is that if I witness something like that, that I would take, firstly, I'd do it privately, directly with the person who I thought was out of kilter. And then secondly, I'd go and see the person who I thought was bullied or put in an invidious situation and ask them how they felt about it. And then I'd bring the two of them together to say, do you both agree that that was unacceptable? And I've had 2 or 3 instances of that. And again, it's a difficult situation, because what one person says, oh, for God's sake, can we get this done, right? And I thought you were doing this okay yesterday and you're still in the same position. Well, somebody could answer that by saying, yes, I'm sorry, I've been flat out and I've done it. The other person could retreat and say, oh, I feel really embarrassed about this. So if you bring the people together, I've found that you get some commonality between the occurrence, and somebody goes, you know what, I didn't know I'd offended you, and I didn't know that I'd raised my voice, and I apologise for doing that. And if that's a genuine apology, then sometimes the matter's resolved and gone on. In other areas where you get a situation where somebody acts and another person reacts, then I've had circumstances where one person said exactly that. Oh God, I didn't realise I'd done that. And when I brought them together, the other person wouldn't accept the apology, and wouldn't said, "Oh, I don't believe they're being that they mean it." And the other person said, "Oh, I do mean it. I was." So it's very difficult, and I think that each to answer your question, definitely I wouldn't confront them, but definitely I would take them separately, and then I'd try to bring them together. And then if I couldn't do something, we'd bring in somebody from outside to actually do it, take it. Matthew, how do you feel about that?
I agree with that. I guess our approach and my kind of approach in this situation is creating that safe environment. So making sure that it isn't in a confrontational environment, but also building that trust through that process. So I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, that respect, trust, whilst also ensuring a sense of accountability and commitment to make sure you're creating that safe environment as part of that process. I feel the worst kind of thing that can be done is sitting back and not taking action, or stepping back and waiting to deal with it. I think there needs to be that proactive approach, and it needs to be seen as a priority for the organisation, irrespective.
Is what you've said there is that to make the person feel safe. I think that's the most operative thing you've got to do, isn't it?
Definitely.
Well, and I have, one of the things, as Matthew touched on, the educational side of it, as you get everybody to a level of what is acceptable behaviour, you then actually empower other people to call out that maybe that's not appropriate values that doesn't line up with our company values, or it's not how we handle it, or something like that, just so that, you're starting to create that culture of what's okay and what's not, which I'm sure you all have in play in your organisations. So beyond conferences, ensuring that all employees feel safe at work. I know, Robert, you're really passionate about this. Whether it's at a social event or at your desk, safety is really important. So you've also shared with me that that's led you to change a little bit your thoughts about socialising at all, and how you tackle that across the broader workspace.
Yeah, I guess we used to always on Friday say at 4 o'clock, try and put down your pen, so to speak, and come and have a drink, have a social drink before you leave the office at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, or and that seemed to work really well for quite a few years. Then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and of course it all stopped. We were actually out of office for 2 full years, and so when you bring them back together, we brought them back in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So there was no Friday drink. So somebody said, could we have a drink on Friday? And so I simply said, yes, please do. And then I ignored the I guess I ignored supervising that system, or having any management team supervising it. It was an honour system. There was alcohol on the fridges on each of the 5 floors here, and the company paid for some nibblies and stuff like that. And then what I didn't realise is that was morphing into not from 4 to 5:30 or 6, but was going till 6:30, late till 7:30, till 8:30, and then people were running out of alcohol on one level and going down to another level to see if they had any alcohol left, and then all of a sudden I'm left with groups of people then leaving here having drunk too much, being unsupervised, not drunk out of their mind, but and then going on, and then we had a couple of instances where people were still out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then again, some people were taking that as an invitation to push the boundaries of what's acceptable to do things. And so I had to reflect on my poor judgment and poor management for not having set a really firm guideline on this. And this sounds so. What we've done is we took all alcohol out of the 5 floors, and I just said simply, look, it's been an honest system. I've had some instances where it's been abused, so we're taking away that. Now that meant that I had I'd punished 400 people in the Sydney office for maybe 4 or 5 people's poor supervision, poor acting for what they should or shouldn't have done. And so now I'm about to reintroduce it on a definitive, like you can have a drink from 4 and you must be leaving the office by 6. Okay, there'll be sufficient alcohol for a couple of drinks each, and it looks like I'm a school teacher that's sitting up the front talking to some naughty boys and naughty girls, but that way I'm trying to introduce it back in a more, I don't know, civilized, a more responsible manner, without actually having somebody standing there going, you can't have another drink, or you've had too many twisties, or things like that. So I take the full blame for that, because I thought we had a group of mature people that could do that, and I think it was a mistake. And I'll let you know in a few months' time, as we introduce it, whether it's worked.
Well, and look, you're clearly a very responsible employer and thoughtful about your people, and so you're right. You'd like to think that they're all grown up and can be responsible too.
Well, I mean, that plays to what Matthew said about having a safe environment. You should be able to, if the company allows you to have a couple of drinks, I guess, feel safe to go and have a couple of drinks, right? And then say, well, I'm on my way home. So you've got to play to all of that, I guess. Matthew, have you had this experience?
I definitely have, and I think one, in reflecting on the pandemic and that returning back to the workplace, what we essentially did was use that as an opportunity to do a reassessment of our values, and use that as an opportunity to get engagement amongst the team to look at, how are we going to really recognise what is acceptable behaviour. So for us, we, similar to those social kind of activities and bringing the team on that journey, we really did the same thing. We set the parameters around what is respectful, what is acceptable, and how do you get that correct balance through the process. So we essentially set up, as part of our review of our values, we went through a process of setting up subcommittees who co-designed through an engagement process, working across departments within the business to look at what is important to them. And we also used it as almost a reintroduction or a re-onboarding of the team through a process. And we also ran facilitated sessions where we engaged an external HR facilitator to come through and actually look at our inclusion policy, look at our hospitality package, policy around what is acceptable within the workplace. So I completely agree, and I think coming out of the pandemic as well, it's given a bit of an opportunity to do a bit of a reset and reassessment.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I've done, or in the process of doing.
Sounds like it. We've got a question from the audience to both of you. For those working in roles supporting the business to address culture and poor workplace behaviour, what advice do you have to garner support from CEOs, managing directors and executive leadership teams who may be resistant or not recognise the importance of these issues and the need to be proactive?
Matthew, please go.
Okay. What we've essentially done is looked at, rather than treating it in isolation and where there might be a certain individual or so forth that may not be on the journey or may not, be presenting a positive front, we approach it very much on a team mentality. So we set up working groups where we make sure that we have representation across the business to really champion that change, so that it's not treated in a way that's confrontational where one individual is singled out. So we actually use it as an opportunity to strategically bring together a team to kind of champion and kind of co-design the solution.
Yeah, I guess we have a diversity and inclusion committee here, and then that also includes the staff being able to say anything they want about the functionality of the business, we have an email that's simply hey, HEAY, at steadfast.com.au, and that anybody can write to that, and they can be anonymous if they want to, okay. And they can say things that they don't like about the business, or things that they think the business should address or should modify. I guess rather, if I felt that I was working in an organisation where the CEO or the management team didn't have the same emphatic view about life as I do, I would move away, because I think that it's not much good working in an environment where they don't recognise what your needs and what you need about fulfilment within a business.
I think that's some very good advice to consider. It's also there's an element that we're uncovering that a number of senior leaders that are men have no insight to the safety aspect, and so are living a little bit blindsided. So perhaps also sharing some real examples with them might help give them a little bit of a different perspective, as well as also considering if they are fathers of daughters and wives, and just getting them to consider it from that perspective as opposed to their own perspective.
Yeah.
And Lisa, if I can just kind of add a comment to that as well, because I also think from an executive perspective as well, I think that education piece gets lost so often when I guess senior executives are also busy. We really need to take that step back to look at it can't be lost through the process, and we also need to take a level of accountability in making sure that we're committed to being up to date through that process.
You know what? I think that's a very valuable point to say, that sometimes senior executives get very busy, and sometimes they don't smell the roses, and it's not an intentional thing. And it's just that they become completely engulfed in what they're doing, and the simplest things can be forgotten. So yeah, I think training is probably a good idea, and I think it does happen sometimes. I mean, if somebody works past about 7 o'clock at night here, they have to get a taxi home. Okay, I don't care whether they live at Penrith or where they live. I don't want anybody in our senior management team that control people to say, oh, you'll be all right getting home, won't you? I mean, I want people to know they can do that. So, but yeah, I've found that with some senior people that they haven't smelt the roses, and it hasn't been deliberate. It's been, oh, I never considered that. But that gets back to the ability for people who work within your organisation to feel safe, to be able to say, hey, look, you're not listening to what I'm saying, without fear that their job's going to get taken away from them, or, oh, don't talk to them again, you know, they're troublemakers. So you've got to create that feeling of comfort within your organisation. I think that people can come to you and do that.
And I think that that anonymous email is quite a common one. There's a number of different organisations that have similar things set up, which I think allows people that constant feedback option. So let's talk a little bit about quotas. They do have their pros and cons. Matthew, what are your thoughts on this?
I think quotas are very important. I think from a kind of best practice and accountability perspective, I think quotas should set the baseline, but shouldn't really define what optimal kind of performance is. So I'm very supportive of quotas where used as a baseline.
I'm probably not keen on quotas. I'm very keen on targets. Okay, and I believe that you should have a target. I'm always worried that if you put a quota, that somebody will go, okay, the next 2 people we put on have got to be women, okay? Or indeed, in one of my departments, I said, hey, the next person you employ has got to be a man, okay? Because there's 80% women and 20% men. So I've introduced here. I mean, we've been fortunate. I mean, we've got 46% of our workforce, 54% of our workforce is women, and 46% of them are in management roles. So we've been fortunate to be able to achieve a pretty good balance without having a quota. But indeed, probably about just before COVID, I was dead anti on quotas. And then a woman that a high profile woman I said, do you think we should do quotas to get women? And she said, if you're not happy with quotas, set a target. And I said, look, how do we do that? And she said, and I adopted it. She said, well, when you're going to employ somebody, simply say we want 50% women candidates and 50% men candidates. And that was really easy to do. And all of a sudden, we found that it solved our problem from that point of view. So I think probably that was an invert way of getting a quota anyway, wasn't it, Matthew? I suppose by saying that. I mean, and because we got a greater proportion, and then I noticed with a lot of the staff management, the staffing companies, they seem to push the guys before they push the women, and it was amazing that when I look back at the candidates that were coming through, majority were men. And then when we said we want 50-50, we got a tremendous range of women that came through. So I guess I'm disagreeing with you, but probably inadvertently I'm doing a similar thing to it, but from that point of view. But yeah.
Well, and as a result, you've largely got 46% women into leadership, which is great. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the opportunities for new businesses and how they can be the champions of best practice. So Matthew, I know this is something you're very passionate about. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, no, very much so. So I've got the privilege of working with, I guess, many entrepreneurial businesses, so franchising operating obviously across all of Australia and beyond. And where I see a lot of opportunity moving forward is moving into business, and igniting new business provides a really good opportunity to look at setting what is best practice, opposed to being informed by the past and systems and so forth that may be a legacy that a business kind of inherits. So I see so much opportunity for entrepreneurs coming in to say, this is what we see as standardized norm and acceptance, but what are we going to do to be a step ahead? So I've, as I said, had an opportunity to talk to so many organizations where they're innovative, but they're taking that step back to say, okay, so what is our recruitment process? How can we make sure that we're accessible as an employer? How can we make sure that we're, I guess, creating that sense of flexibility, but also acknowledging diversity in all its forms, which I think is really important, but also making sure that it's having these kind of conversations to be able to say, these are the systems we're building to make sure we're not in a scenario where the behaviour is unacceptable.
Mm. And in your role as head of the Franchise Council, you're in a great position to share best practice across the group and to new and emerging people.
And I think that also brings back that kind of focus on education as well, because I think people really need to know and be aware of what their obligations are. And I think that's where the piece around safety really comes into it as well, because I think especially when people have an opportunity to set their standards and set their expectations, in order for those expectations to be set, they also need to know their obligations. So working through that as a process is really important. And I think also from an entrepreneurship perspective, looking at, I guess, how digital can also be, and digital infrastructure can be an enabler for getting the message out there. So I'm a really big supporter of, I guess, awards that kind of recognise where there is innovation, that recognise kind of best practice, and, you know, shift the mindset from thinking, let's move away from just compliance and fulfilling a baseline expectation, and look at the baseline expectations where we start, and then let's build off that. So I feel I'm quite fortunate being able to work with a membership and a cohort who, I guess, have that mindset of let's look progressively and let's move forward. So I'm very much a champion for that. And for us as a business, we've made a decision to set up a diversity and inclusion team within our business who is focused on, I guess, building those systems and processes and models that we can then provide to our members to implement operationally, which is so important. It's one of those things I always say to the team, it's one thing to have a policy and a strategy set. It's a whole other thing to be able to operationalize it and then be able to carry it through and make sure that it sticks.
And at the moment, Matthew's knee-deep in judging for the Gender Equity Awards, so you never know, he might be coming across new innovative ideas as we speak. It's been a fabulous discussion, Robert and Matthew. Do you have any pieces of advice, Robert? Maybe if you could give 3 tips for men who want to be more inclusive.
Okay, look, I think it's really simple to consider that women are not equal in the workplace yet, and that they should be, and that just consider, firstly, when you're employing somebody, to have some flexibility in your workplace to allow somebody who may want to take their children to school. And I mean, we've got a completely flexible work environment. So and any woman who works for, in fact, any man, I should say, that sounds like I'm excluding the man, but anybody that's got a need to have a different type of work hours to facilitate family environment, then we work to accommodate that. And so I think that's something that you probably need to give some consideration with bringing people in. The second thing I'd say is that when you advertise for a job or you're looking to replace somebody, my experience, and I am one with men, is that they will always say that they can do the job, whereas women will become circumspect and go, you know what, I probably could do that and that and that, but I lack a little bit here. And what I would encourage people to do is to when they are looking to bring a woman into their organisation, explain that the parameters of the job are all this, but if you've got most of them, we'll help you if you're the right candidate to get through and to achieving the job. So I think there's a couple of things, and then lastly, I really struggle with the pay gap on women. I mean, I don't understand how that can happen. I mean, if we advertise a job, at that price, regardless of who applies for it. So I think if there's still, and I accept the statistics that there is a gender pay gap. Make sure there isn't one when you're advertising a job. It's pretty simple to do. You can solve that problem by going, this is the job and this is how much we pay. Okay, and then whoever applies, it's not so. They're the three areas I think you have to address if you're trying to be egalitarian in your employment contract.
And I think clearly you're about to get an avalanche of people applying to you on the basis of this webinar. Matthew, what are your 3 points?
I would say, firstly, have the conversation. I think it's important to have the conversation, but secondly, really prioritise it. But also, I think it's really important to see diversity and inclusion as not an obligation, but instead an opportunity. And I think so much of the time, culture is missed and education is missed. And I think we need to look at what retention, the value that retention provides to an organisation, but also it's, the economic impact of building a business that's engaged with their staff, where staff feel safe. And also that sense of honesty and transparency as leaders. Businesses pivot, priorities shift, but that's not enough of an excuse to take a step back and say it's not important. So what I would say, as far as on my experience and my kind of, my feedback is, we need to not see any instances that are raised that come up within this area. We need to see it as embedded into our day-to-day.
Awesome. Well, you've heard it from the experts. If you want to be part of accelerating gender equity, you need to take some action. Sitting on the sidelines won't help. So don't be afraid of difficult conversations, and hopefully through some of these great examples, you now have your own ideas. Remember, you can take action to become better informed and become a male ally to those at Business and Heels, and every membership also includes that for a woman. I want to give a huge thank you to Robert Kelly and Matthew Monahan. We'll do the thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And we really, best of good luck with the twisties and the Robert. Thank you so much for sharing your great wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.